And welcome to Professor Arnold Bakker, and of course also our Dean, Professor Daniel van Lille, and our Director of the School of Management, Dr. Adi Drosky, and then of course everybody else. So Arnold, thank you very much again for last week's presentation. It was most exciting and interesting, newest developments on the job demands resources model. And just to let everybody know that we have recorded that session. So I know there's interest in especially our Dean and Dr. Drosky, or Professor Drosky was not able to attend last week. So we will make it accessible to you. So Arnold, we're looking forward to today's presentation. And I know in the advert, we frame it as a webinar or as a workshop, but really it's a masterclass, Arnold. So thanks again. And just the house rules, people. While Professor Bakker is presenting, we would like you to mute and switch off your camera, and also not to pose or ask any questions in the chat box. We will leave that for the Q&A session that's going to be facilitated by Professor Petrus Nal at the end. So thank you, Arnold. Over to you.
Thank you, Freddie. Can you hear me?
Clearly, Arnold. Clearly.
Yeah. Okay. Let me start sharing my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Okay. Good morning. Yeah, exciting. That is how I feel. Not because it is the first time that I give a presentation, and also not the first time online, but it is a new presentation that I made. But I looked in the literature, searching for the most interesting stuff. And for me, this work on flow started in 1999 when I attended a conference in Baltimore. That was the APA NIOSH conference on work, stress, and health. And I was there with Wilmar Schauffele. And at the time, we were working on the measurement of work engagement, the Utrecht work engagement scale. And we decided after the conference to go to New York. And there we stood on the Twin Towers in 1999, imagine. And in the cellar of the Twin Towers, there was a bookstore where I found two books written by Csikszentmihalyi. And the books were about flow, and I wanted to educate myself about the topic because I thought it was relevant for work engagement. Yeah, work engagement is different from flow in that flow is much more a peak experience. So I will dedicate some slides to the measurement. The measurement is done through experience sampling. And also flow is really is about, and I will come to the definition in a while, is about getting into the moment, absorption in what you do, which is also a constituent part of work engagement. But engagement also has energy or vigor in it, and whereas flow doesn't. Flow has the component of intrinsic motivation in it. So when you're in flow, you want to continue with the activity because you like it very much. Okay, let's start with the beginning. And this is from a book written by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and he argues that flow is made up by 9 elements. And these elements, when you hear me talking about it, you will start to notice that it looks like there are some predictors and experiences of that build up the phenomenon put together in one. And that is my critique on this approach. I follow a little bit different approach, but still I want to start with the beginning. And the beginning is that, according to Csikszentmihalyi, there is flow when people experience a balance between their own skills, what they're able to do, and the challenges that they face. So if you work on a problem, but this is something that's very simple, you're unlikely to get into flow. But if this problem becomes more challenging, more complex, and you need all your skills to solve the problem, then flow is more likely. There is action awareness merging, so there is absorption or immersion in the activity. There are clear goals. You know what to do. There's no doubt about what to do. You're really focused. There is unambiguous feedback, so you get immediate feedback from what you do. Currently in my house there are painters at work, and they work non-stop. And they paint again and again and again, and they get immediate feedback because the walls, in the end, they look super nice. So that is what is meant by unambiguous feedback from the work that you do. There is concentration on the task, so you're very focused, and there is a sense of control. You have control over what happens. You lose self-consciousness, so you forget about time. That's also the component under it. So there is really some overlap between these 9 elements, but you lose self-conscious. You're really into, I have this when I do calculations with, for example, structural equation modeling. I can completely forget that I was supposed to be cooking, and that means then that flow has as a consequence that we eat very late as a family. But it feels nice, even though you can get hungry. And it's according to Csikszentmihalyi, it's an autotelic experience, which means that the activity becomes a goal in itself. So you really want to be busy with this. Okay, as I said, there are several. Let me go back. There are several components here, like goals, feedback. That could also be the challenge, skill, balance. There could be something that is more or less in the environment, and that can then trigger things like action awareness merging, which we call absorption, or high concentration and absorption. If you do an analysis and you include both components separately, there is super high overlap. That is 0.85, 0.90 overlap actually. So this is all theoretical, but empirically, I think it comes down to more or less 3 components. And if you look at definitions, this is one by Csikszentmihalyi, written down in a book from 97, where he says that flow is a state of consciousness where people become totally immersed in an activity and enjoy it intensely. This is the short definition. And here there are actually 2 components only: immersion and enjoyment. And if you look at the various definitions that are that you can find in literature, you will find these 3 components almost everywhere: absorption, immersion in the activity, intrinsic motivation, and then as a kind of side effect, but it coincides with what happens. Usually people realize it only after the activity that they have enjoyed it very much. So, but usually flow is composed by these 3 elements: absorption, enjoyment, intrinsic motivation. Okay, then there have been several theories, and the most dominant is the channel model of flow, where it's indeed argued that the balance between the skills that you have from low to high here on the x-axis and the challenges that you face from low to high on the y-axis, they determine whether you experience flow. And this is an interesting model. It's called channel because of this channel in the middle, the diagonal. It says, therefore, that even if you have low skills, you can have flow, but you should be facing relatively low challenges. Yeah. So, and it goes up. So if your skills go up, your challenges should also go up. If I have boring tasks to do as a professor, for example, I have to work on bureaucratic tasks, then that's really boring for me because that's not challenging. I have higher skills. Then I can make it more challenging, for example, by trying to fill out the bureaucratic forms as soon as possible. So I make it more challenging, and that might mean that my boredom transforms into flow. Or if I play tennis, I'm not so good at tennis, my skills are very low. Against Federer, he's super good at tennis, so the challenge is super high. I will be, the balls will fly around my ears, and I will feel anxious and stressed. So what I can do is I can train very hard, increase my skills, and try to get here but that will take like years. It will never happen. So it would be better for me to play against my wife. She is actually a reasonably good tennis player, but then that would lower the challenge, and that would increase the chance of me having some flow while playing tennis. So I give the example of work and sports, because flow has been found in various life domains. But particularly important is that you are actively involved in activities. Okay, so I will get to the newer work on flow, but first let's say, why is this interesting and important? Susanna Jorens and Marissa Salanova have looked at the outcomes of flow. That's in a book that they wrote a chapter, and they find that flow goes along with positive mood, engagement in the task, so really putting a lot of effort in your task, job satisfaction when you look at the workplace, in-role performance, so people are in flow, they perform better, and they are also more creative. These are the 5 outcomes that you can find if you look at the literature. Okay, so the question is, what can we do as management scholars or as work and organizational psychology scholars to increase flow, since flow has these positive outcomes? So I have looked at research that has looked at job design, at job characteristics, to find out whether this can help, whether you can design your job such that you are more likely to experience flow. Okay, so there is this well-known model by Hackman and Oldham, the job characteristics theory. And they argue that there are 5 important job characteristics. We call these job resources that could be good candidates to stimulate flow. And well, they have not studied flow in their model, but this model started to appear at the same time that Csikszentmihalyi was working on flow. It's the same zeitgeist, so to say. And what they argue is that if your job is characterized by the possibility to use a variety of your skills, when your job has task identity, that you're not just a small element in a bigger process, but I looked up an example. So for example, you are a plumber, and you could have task identity if you're responsible for finding a problem of a client when it comes to plumbing, you fix it, you ensure that it doesn't happen again, and also you send an invoice. So it would not be high on task identity if you only sent the invoice, for example. So that would be only a part of the whole task. So task identity means that it is a whole, the whole job is what you do. Task significance, having an important impact on others. And these 3 elements, skill variety, task identity, and task significance, they foster, according to job characteristics theory, they foster meaningfulness, and indirectly, this is a mediated effect, it will foster intrinsic motivation, job satisfaction, and performance. So we see here the intrinsic motivation component of flow is predicted by job characteristics. So these 3 are good candidates for being predictors of flow as well. We see as other predictors, autonomy and feedback. They trigger other psychological states that help to increase intrinsic motivation, job satisfaction, and performance. Okay, so I found a study by Eva De Maruti published in 2006 in the Journal of Occupational Health Psychology, and she surveyed 113 employees from various occupations and their colleagues who reported on their performance. And these people came from the theater sector, dentistry, daycare, consultancy, even the tax office. So you can find flow everywhere. That is what we are saying here, at the school, at the ministry. And she measured with the survey job characteristics, so the 5 that I just presented, the experience of flow with the work-related flow scale, the WOLF, and job performance was then rated by colleagues, in-role and extra-role performance. And she also looked at the role of conscientiousness. So here is the overall model that she tested. So the 5 job characteristics are the predictors here. Flow is the mediator. In-role performance, do you do your task? As well as extra role performance, do you do a little bit more than your task? Do you help your colleagues, for example? What are the outcomes? And consensusness is here the moderator of the flow performance relationships, arguing that people who are really high on consensusness, they are predisposed to be persistent, to be very precise, to be hardworking. So they will use their flow really for their work to translate it into performance. That is the idea, that the effect will be stronger for people high in consensusness. It's a bit too fast. So what she found is that job characteristics influence or are related to performance, in-role and extra role, through the experience of flow, intrinsic motivation, enjoyment, and absorption. And the effects were stronger for people high in consensusness. And we see that here we have flow as a predictor. The higher the flow, the white line here, the higher the in-role performance in the eyes of the colleagues. And this is the line that stands for people high in consensusness. So the relationship more or less disappears for people low in consensusness. So the main effect is still there. It's in between these two lines, as you can imagine. And she finds exactly the same effect. It's a little bit different for extra role performance. So people are more willing to help their colleagues when they are in flow, but particularly if they are of the type that is hardworking, persistent, and so forth. Yeah, and the effect disappears for people low in consensus. So here we see that personality moderates the relationship between the experiences that people have and the things that they accomplish. Okay, so this is some evidence for job characteristics predicting flow, and there are some other studies by researchers in the UK, and I think there are about 3 also researchers in Canada. Fulliger, for example, has done a study on job characteristics and flow. So there are several studies, not a lot, just a handful, as far as I know, that convincingly show this link between job characteristics and flow. So we did a study with Anna Mäki-Kangas from Finland, a study that was conducted in the Netherlands. I did a study with some of my students. This is a study where we have 3 different measurements. It's a 3-wave study among 335 employees of an employment agency. So they take care of the jobs of others. So they place people who look for temporary jobs, they place them in different companies. And so we follow them over time. There is 1 month in between the measurements. And we included several job resources, including autonomy, feedback, social support, coaching by the supervisor, and opportunities to grow. And of course, we have the measure of flow. And she did a latent change score analysis, or latent growth analysis, what we see here. And we see here she included also exhaustion at time 1. And what we see is that the people who are more tired at time 1, they are less likely to experience flow at the same time. So the level of flow is lower among those who are more tired. These people also report lower level of job resources, but most interesting here in this study is the finding that the changes in flow go hand in hand with changes in job resources. So when the resources go up, flow goes up. When resources go down, flow goes down. That is what you see here. So there's no causality here, but this is changes that go hand in hand. So it seems like job characteristics are important for flow, and those who are in flow may also generate more resources themselves. That is what this says. So more theoretically, this is what I showed last week as well. We have job demands and resources. There can be a variety of demands and resources, as we all know. But it could well be, and I've not seen a study on that, but it would be nice for people who search for a new topic to look at the interaction between job demands and resources, particularly challenge job demands, I think. if these go hand in hand with the job resources, I think we can expect a flow to happen. So this would be then a combination of JDR plus the channel model of flow. Okay, yeah, then about contagion. So flow is something that people really experience themselves, even though there is some not super convincing evidence for flow to happen in a group as well. But I've done a study where it looks like that flow could be contagious. And I studied for that music teachers and their students. So these are actually two brothers, twin brothers, or not twins, but they look very similar. And they are famous pianists, the brothers Nussen. And I took them because they probably imitate each other a lot. So what we did in the study, we have a survey among 178 music teachers and 605 of their students who study music. This was a collaboration with the Royal Dutch Society for Music Artists. One of my students was playing and was involved there. And that's how we got access to the sample. And the people played various different instruments, the piano, the flute, the guitar, violin, keyboard, and several others. And what we measured is the job resources of the teachers, and also whether they experienced the balance between their skills and the challenges that they faced, and the flow of the teachers, but also the flow experienced by the students. So we adjusted the measure of flow to not relate to work, but for the students, it related to playing the piano, playing the flute, and so forth. And what we found is the following. We see that the job resources of the teachers, so when teachers have more support, feedback from others, coaching, autonomy, students experience more flow. That's a very interesting effect. And the effect is there because the teachers with more resources, they have a higher balance, a better balance between their skills and the challenges that they face while doing their work, which helps to feel, to experience flow. And here we see this correlation was about 0.30, which is quite nice. This was a structural equation model. We see here the kind of contagion effect that the flow of the students is higher when the flow of the teachers is higher. So I think a nice study, but still we see here that this is survey research, and when it comes to flow, actually originally that research started with beepers. So what we now do with smartphones used to be done with beepers that people were carrying around, and at certain random points in time during the day, the beep would go off, and then people would need to fill out a paper and pencil short questionnaire, what they were doing, how they were feeling, and so forth. So at the moment, you see more and more experience sampling studies. So this has, of course, skyrocketed. We see, because of the smartphones, we see a lot of research on this. So if you look at the literature, this is a paper by Van Berkel et al. They looked at a number of papers using the diary method and or experience sampling method while looking in Google Scholar. And you see here that's almost zero in the 80s, 90s. And then it starts to take off when the technique becomes better. The internet came in here. We didn't have smartphones in Europe or Africa yet, I think, but in Japan they have. And here we see that it goes higher and higher. So in the thousands of studies that use either a daily diary method, so a quantitative daily diary, which means that you have very short questionnaires where people on their phone fill out the questions, and or experience sampling. And experience sampling means that you sample the experiences that people have by, oftentimes this is done by taking, let's say, 2-hour periods throughout the day, several 2-hour periods. So for example, you could take a period from 8 to 10, from 10 to 12, from 12 to 2, from 2 to 4, from 4 to 6. And during this 2-hour period, you send randomly in that period, so to be independent of the specific time of the day, you send the message, here is your survey, and then people fill out short questions, including, for example, questions about challenges and skills, and questions about flow, and then you can look at the question whether flow experiences throughout the day are increasing when there is a good balance between challenge and skills. So that is the way that this works. So what we see more generally, and my audience I think is broad, so I put it on the table, I explain it a bit. So what we see is that most research follows a person approach. So we look at differences between people. So we look at, for example, people who are lower in conscientiousness versus higher in conscientiousness. The high conscientious people usually score higher on performance, but the situational approach says looks at differences between situations, for example, in how you feel or whether you use your conscientiousness and whether that translates during that episode into higher performance. So here, usually we base the analysis on differences between people. And that means that we assume that the constructs that we investigate, that they are relatively stable over time. And this is, yeah, to a certain extent, this is the case. There is stability, but there is also a lot changing. And even more interesting, even if some people are usually very engaged in the work or have very high likelihood of being in flow, there are always off days. And so there are peaks and lows, and this is called within person differences. And you can find this if you use a diary approach. You can see these substantial fluctuations in subjective well-being. For example, about 59% in happiness, 67% in vigor, 88% in recovery, because we recover after work every day, more or less, and that fluctuates within persons. So you don't recover to the same extent every day. And the same goes for engagement. And I looked up, but I didn't find an overall average for flow. But I estimate, if I look at some specific studies, that it's about 50% of the variance in flow is within person. So dependent on the situation. Okay. So what we can do with this experience sampling or diary method is we implement a process perspective in work and organization psychology. So I find it super interesting. I started doing this about 12 years ago, I think, because I found that when you do longitudinal research, there is a very high stability coefficient between the measurements, even if you have 1 year in between. And it's not true that things are completely stable, but I think you average out so much that in the end, yeah, the averages correlate very much, but you don't look precise enough. So with the diary method, you look much more precise because you ask every day, for example, at the end of the day or during the day, several times you ask people what they are doing, how their work environment looks like, how their performance looks like. So there is very little time between the thing happening and the reporting about it. And that makes the influence of biases much less of a problem. We can investigate fluctuations, so that's another advantage. And there are different approaches. You have experience sampling, as I explained, but you can also sample events. So, for example, we did a study with police officers where the police officers had to report their well-being and their coping with emotions every time after they had been involved in dealing with a conflict with civilians. So when they were on duty and doing surveillance and they went to a problematic situation, after the situation was over, they would use their questionnaire to fill out the questions that we had. And you have then the daily diary studies. This is usually where we ask people to report at the end of the day, or 2 times a day, for example, in the evening and in the morning, or in the evening and at the end of the workday. to reflect on what happened during the day. So that is what we do with this approach, and we reduce bias, and also we can take the situational context much more into consideration when we study feelings, cognitions, and behavior. I suddenly remember an experience that I had when I went with Eva de Maruti, my wife. We went to Sevilla, and she gave a workshop in Seville for colleagues, and our children were still quite small. And I was walking through the city, beautiful city, but at that particular day in February, it was raining like crazy. And the children started to cry, and I thought, whoa, what am I doing here? And it was a bit stressful. But okay, we found a cafe, and we drank something, and we looked at some nice places. In the evening, we went for dinner with the colleagues. And so the week went on, and afterwards, the next week, my colleagues asked me, how was Seville? I said, oh, wow, it was fantastic. We had very nice meals, we had nice conversations. So if you ask me afterwards, how was the experience of Seville in Spain? My report was very positive. But if you would have asked me on the rainy day with the crying children, then my report on my well-being and the situation would have been much lower. So the situational context can be taken into account when you study feelings, when we follow a daily approach. So it's more precise, let's say. So usually the design of this type of study is multi-level. So we use general surveys to ask people for their demographics, like the gender, age, and so forth, but also personality, the things that we expect that do not change really. And then during several moments of the day and across days, we ask people for their experiences of flow. We can ask for job characteristics at the different moments, and then we can analyze fluctuations in job characteristics and fluctuations in flow, for example. And of course, what happens with this kind of studies, you might be very much aware of it, so I'm sorry if this is redundant, but some people might not know this. You use shortened questionnaires, of course, because otherwise you get respondent fatigue. And yeah, you cannot ask the very lengthy questionnaires and ask people to fill them out many times. So you use reduced questionnaires so that it's doable. And you can use various techniques. So you can use laptops, you can use paper and pencil. But for the momentary assessments, it makes sense to use smartphones, wearables like a ring that picks up some of your strain or stress, your galvanic skin response, for example. You can use smart watches and so forth. So this makes it also better possible to synchronize, let's say, physiological measurements or steps, the steps that you take to sync that with the experience that people report, the subjective experiences that they have. So this is another issue that we have in psychological research, that often we ask people to report after having experienced a lot of things, but there are now also techniques to measure things more or less in vivo when they happen. Okay. Now let me switch to, and I will use in the next studies, I will use this experience sampling approach or the diary approach. Let me switch to what I find very exciting, and that will come back also in 2 weeks from now in the presentation about job crafting and playful work design. I think it's very important to focus on what I call self-determination, that people can determine their own well-being to a certain extent. And of course, you can be unlucky, things happen to us. But to a certain extent, we can manipulate the reality so as to make for a better future. So, and this is the definition that Sharon Parker and colleagues use. She says then when it comes to proactivity, proactive individuals take the initiative to improve their current circumstances. So you don't sit and wait and, oh, my work pressure is high, and it becomes higher, and you complain and you don't do anything about it. Now, if you're proactive, you try to change your work pressure, or you try to look for resources, or you set goals for yourself. So you envision and plan for a different future by changing the environment. So for example, your job characteristics, or by changing yourself, for example, by following a training or by going for a walk outside, so as to recuperate from your job-related stress, and do that throughout the day so that you stay fit during the day. So that is what determines yourself. Okay, we have developed this model of work-related flow. This is a paper that we published in Occupational Health Science, a new journal that started in 2017. But this was one of the first articles with Marianne van Woerkom. And we see here what we propose is that you can determine yourself whether you will experience flow and whether you will perform well. And you can use several techniques for that, including the use of your strengths. So I will have an example of that later on. Job crafting, so optimizing your job demands and resources on a daily basis. So on the days that you optimize your resources, you could increase your flow and have a better performance. Self-leadership, I will also go into that. And by making your work more playful, for example, by using humor or by playing a little competition with yourself, for example, getting rid of 30 emails within 1 hour. That would be a way to experience flow, even though dealing with mails can be stressful, can be boring, but you can make it a flow activity by increasing your challenges. And that is what we call playful work design. And what we say further is that you can determine to a certain extent, but it depends also on your personal resources, like your optimism and your self-efficacy. So if you're self-efficacious, you believe that you really can do it, then these proactive strategies will be more likely to change your experience of flow and your performance. And when it's lower, you will probably be less likely to be successful. And we say it depends on the context. So for example, it may depend on the human resource practices of the organization. It may depend on your leader, your supervisor, whether there is autonomy provided so that you can use your strengths and do your work in the way that you think it fits best to your strong points. So the context is here a moderator as well. So this is the theory. This is purely theoretical, this article. But it fits very nicely to what Csikszentmihalyi said in his book. And he said he has this idea that people who want to have flow, they can try to overcome the anxieties and depressions of contemporary life. But therefore, individuals must become independent of the social environment. Don't wait and see what happens, to the degree that they no longer respond exclusively in terms of its rewards and punishments. So you don't wait for the environment to give you the resources or the organization to provide you with challenges. No. Csikszentmihalyi said, and he proposes this more generally, not only for the workplace. He says to achieve such autonomy, a person has to learn to provide rewards to herself. She has to develop the ability to find enjoyment and purpose, regardless of the external circumstances. So what he proposes is you have to be proactive. So this is consistent with what Sharon Parker says in her recent work. So I looked up the results of a study that I did last year, and we analyzed it. This is not published yet. This is a study among 129 Dutch employees from various sectors: healthcare, finance, insurance, communication, technology. And the data were collected across 4 to 5 days. So at the end of each day, people reported their self-leadership, their level of flow, their performance, and whether they ruminated about COVID-19. And in total, we had a lot of statistical power. We had 557 data points. So that's the number of people times the number of days. And we use this to test the following model, where we look at self-leadership as a predictor of flow and indirectly of performance. And self-leadership is here operationalized with a short questionnaire that people fill out every day, asking for goal setting. Did you set specific goals today? Self-reward, did you reward yourself today? Constructive thoughts, and several other of these self-leadership techniques that people can use to get their work done. And when the prediction is when you determine yourself through self-leadership what is going to happen, you will be more likely to experience flow, because you will make your the challenges that you face at work in sync with the skills that you have. And thus flow will be more likely, and performance as well. And we also predicted that this effect will be stronger when and more needed when people ruminate a lot about COVID-19. So these data were collected in, I think it was the beginning of the second wave. So there was a peak in the Netherlands around May 2020 that we collected this data. With 5 master students, I did that. We see here, so first of all, we found these indirect effects. So that is a first important finding. So on the days that people engaged in self-leadership, in goal setting, self-rewarding, and support, they experience more intrinsic motivation, absorption, and enjoyment, and they perform better. And this was particularly happening when the problems in their head were actually high. So rumination actually strengthened the effect of self-leadership. So self-leadership was more important for predicting flow when rumination was high. Or put differently, when people did not lead themselves, manage their feelings, manage their goals, their work tasks, and so forth, on these days, rumination could destruct their experience of flow. So then on these days, their flow level was much lower than when they didn't ruminate. So, but self-leadership could change that picture. Okay, then one of the other strategies is to use your strengths. And strengths are very generally defined by Linley and Harrington as a natural capacity for behaving, thinking, or feeling in a way that allows optimal functioning and performance in the pursuit of valued outcomes. So strengths means that these are things that come very naturally. So it could be that you're by nature very curious, or that you are a brave person. So for example, let's say that you are a Marine and you are not afraid to climb the masts, or that you are by nature a very kind person. And then the idea of strength theory is that it's important to use these strengths, even if your work doesn't necessarily ask for it directly. So for example, if you're not in the hospitality branch, then kindness might not be super relevant. But the theory says that if you are, for example, a programmer, and you are very, you have a work that's very linked to introversion, let's say, you don't need to communicate a lot with other people. But if you communicate with others and you use the strength that you nevertheless have, the kindness, then you will program better. Self-control is another example. Humor is another example. There are many different character strengths that have been identified in the virtues in action questionnaire, for example, and there are other approaches as well. And there's also some overlap between these various components. But I find it particularly interesting what happens when people use their strengths. Because when people use their strengths during work-related activities, they can be themselves, they can be authentic. And if you are yourself, you're more likely to reach your goals. If you do what you're good at, you will probably manage to do your thing and to perform well. Okay, this is a study conducted by Liu, is a PhD student of myself and Dimitri van der Linden, and he did his study, experience sampling study, among 165 Chinese employees. He followed people for 5 days in a row, the whole working week, 2 times per day between 10 and 12 and between 2 and 4. He sent at random times in these time periods. He sent messages to people where they were asked to fill out short questionnaires asking for strength use and flow. And these participants were working in agriculture, education and training, information technology, finance. So very broad area of jobs. And what I found very interesting about this study is that this PhD student of mine, Wei Liu, he's really good in programming, in technical stuff. He has an economics background. So I asked him to make some objective performance tests, which I will show on the next slide. First, he found that on the days and during the work episodes of 2 hours that people used their strengths, they reported more flow. So that's a very nice finding. But also, he predicted and found that people, after they had been in flow during that 2-hour work episode, they were more likely to take risks. And the reasoning for that was that if you are in flow, so people were asked to conduct a task after the work episode. So this is then the result of the flow that people have experienced. Flow goes along with intense focus and concentration. And his reasoning is that it leaves then insufficient energy resources to understand risks. If you have then suddenly a task where you have to estimate risks, you will be less good at it if you have been in flow. But also, if you have been in flow, we've seen by the analysis of Llorens and Salanova that people in flow have a more positive mood. This positive mood will also obscure your assessment because you will be more optimistic. So let me tell you how he assessed risk. He used the balloon analog risk task, the BART. And the BART means that you have to pump a balloon, and you can do that several times. And if you do it more times, you will earn more money, virtual money. But if you do it too often, then it can explode, and then you earn nothing. So people who are in flow are more likely to fail on this task. That is what he found. We also looked at attention using a letter combining and remembrance task, arguing that positive mood is associated with global attentional focus. So it will not help to be in flow. So after the flow, your focus will be less good. And this is exactly what he found. So strength use was related to lower performance, so more risks, lower attentional performance because of the flow. So I see that my time is running out, so I'm speeding up a little bit. We will see the next time that I give a presentation what the effects are of playful work design. I'm teasing you a little bit. It's very interesting stuff that we have been doing. We've done around 7 diary studies, but examples of playful work design could be an accountant who tries to send 1 email less every day. So there's a limit to that, of course, I know that. But or a call center employee who tries to end every conversation with humor. Or if you are in a meeting, you can set the challenge for yourself to ask 3 interesting questions or to make 2 people laugh. And if you do that, you are more likely to experience flow. So this is the model that we propose. So you can determine to a certain extent yourself whether you will experience flow and perform well. It will also depend on your personal resources and on the context. But importantly, organizations, the takeaway for organizations is that you can organize and design organizations to facilitate flow by providing sufficient resources on a daily basis. Experience sampling is what I talked about, helps to track people's flow and also the predictors and outcomes over time. Flow can have positive, so most studies have shown positive effects, but we've now seen also some negative effects. And I hope that the model that we propose, that it will be used more often in the future. So the take-home message is, of course, how can you take personal initiative to create your own flow? And with that question, I give it over to Freddie, or to
Petrus.
Yeah, or to Petrus. Yeah, I was searching for his name. This is a cognitively challenging task that I'm doing.
Thank you so much, Arnold, for a most interesting presentation again. So we've got a few minutes left. Petrus, over to you. And you are welcome to either raise your hand or to ask a question in the box. Thank you.
Yeah, so Freddie, so we're just giving people the opportunity to post their questions in the chat function. But as Freddie said, if you would rather like to ask the question sort of like directly, you can just raise your hand. So Freddie, at this point in time, I'm not seeing any questions popping up in the chat function just yet.
Sergio's hand is up.
Sergio, thanks.
Thank you very much. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Professor Bakker. I wanted to ask you about the experience sampling. How do you ensure that you collect data consistently when you're sending out those notifications within that specific time frame? What if the participant is in a meeting, or they're actually in a state of flow or engagement, or they just can't attend to the phone or notification that you sent? How do you accommodate for that?
Yeah, Sergio, very nice to hear you. It's a pity that I can't see you.
Yeah, it is a pity.
Put on your camera. Anyway,
there we go.
It's really good to now see you.
Cool.
We had a good time in South Africa together in the south. Yeah, let me think. This is an important problem, actually. So for example, it is difficult to do an experience sampling study among nurses who are really, let's say, intensive care nurses, or nurses who are taking care of patients and they are doing life-saving activities. They cannot interrupt their work and say, okay, now I'm going to react to your experience sampling study. But well, what you do, you do the best possible. So you send the notification, and then people finish the thing that they do, and then immediately after that, within the same time frame, the work episode, they report on what you are asking. That could be one thing, but also maybe it's wise to study to use this technique, particularly for groups who can handle it. So if you interrupt me while I'm doing my work, okay, when I give a presentation, it will be more difficult to react immediately. But if I would have received the notification just now during this presentation, I could answer the questions immediately after the presentation. So that is how we instruct people to do. And another advantage of doing it electronically, so in the past we were doing this kind of research with paper and pencil, short questionnaires, small booklets. Then the reviewer comments were always, how do you know that people do it at the right time, that they do it immediately at that moment? A little bit related to what you are saying. So at least you can track and find out whether people do it at the right time. And if they don't, and it's very important for your analysis, for example, for the causal ordering, you can throw out the responses and deal with the data that are reliable and useful. That is how this works.
Perfect. Thank you, Professor. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Sergio. So Carleen Carl posed a question, but Carleen, I'm not quite sure if I would be able to do justice to your question that you have posed. Would you perhaps mind just unmuting yourself and posing the question to Arnold, please?
Sure, I can do that. It's asking me all kinds of permissions to access my camera and microphone. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can.
Nice to see you.
Hi, Arnold. Nice to see you again. Okay.
Long time ago.
A long time ago. So it seems that in terms of crafting and flow, that to navigate tasks appropriately, there's a huge sense of self-awareness and efficiency and understanding what each task entails. So I'm just thinking in terms of crafting behaviors, we always encourage people to craft and make the best of situations and create the work life that they want. But it really requires an optimal sense of understanding how you function, understanding the outcomes of tasks required, and how to navigate it appropriately so that you match the activity with the state of being.
Yeah, okay. Okay, yeah, true. I completely agree with Carleen that this might be a task that not everybody can do automatically or naturally. Some people are better at this than others. So, for example, if you are socially or emotionally intelligent, you will be better able probably to craft your emotional demands. So, for example, dealing with complex client questions or demanding patients, because you will be better able to deal with their emotions. That is what your skill. But still, we see in job crafting interventions that people can learn it. So you can teach people how to do it. Then they can train themselves by implementing the plans that they develop in the training. I was expecting that you would ask that all this awareness of crafting your job so that it becomes a better predictor of flow would distract from flow, but sequentially it would still be okay, because if you know or learn or find out and you have an eye for the design of your job, then after you have changed it, then flow will be more likely. So the order is okay if you're not continuously busy with how should I redesign my job. So I think that this, it is true that some people will be better at it than others, but still a lot of people can learn it, and then some people will never learn it and are therefore also less likely to experience flow. That is the reality, I think. Thanks for the question, Carleen.
Yeah, thank you very much. Arnold, so some positive feedback from our delegates. So thank you for such a helpful and interesting presentation. Thank you for bringing theory to life. I've certainly gained insight into personal flow. Then just someone else saying thank you very much for the insights that you've shared. And then the person is just more asking us that yes, we will just make the recording available. So colleagues, we do have maybe time for one more question. If you would like to pose a question, either in the chat box or raise your hand, feel free to do it. So here's a question. What are some of the tools or measuring instruments available to assess the state of flow? Sergio, I hope I understood your question.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Well, there are several instruments.
Prof, it's not really about the measurement instrument. It's just about the technology. Do you just send out a Google link, or is it like a beeper? What's the most cost-effective way that we could do this?
Well, I got a question from one of my PhD students last week about how do you say that? Renewing the contract with the provider of the software that we use for experience sampling research, and it was super expensive actually. Or I found it quite expensive for the study that she wanted to do. It was about €3,500 to get the software. But if you do this as a team, maybe it's doable. So sometimes you can find dedicated software. If you have a question about that, I can look up where we get it. We have used in the past Metric Wire. That's a small company in Canada. You can also use simple Qualtrics, but then you need to send your surveys by hand several times and combine the data and so forth. So it's nicer to use an existing app. So there are several ways to facilitate this, but it depends a little bit on the resources that you have. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So Freddie, over to you to close off the session for us. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Petrus.
Thank you very much, Petrus. And of course, Arnold, maybe you can tell them if they want to have access to your instrument to measure flow. It's freely available.
Yeah, at my website, arnoldbakker.com, you can find under the subcategory of articles, look up an article authored by myself in 2008, and it's called the work-related flow scale, the Wolf. So if you look for Wolf on my website, then you will find it. And yeah, that's freely available, of course. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Arnold. So we are looking forward to your next presentation, Arnold. That will be on the 11th, am I right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that will be on job crafting and playful work design.
Yes.
So, Arnold, we're looking forward to that. And thank you to everybody who stayed right to the end. So we'll keep in touch and
yes.
let you have the recordings. Thank you. Arnold, take care.
Thanks, Eddie. Yeah, have a nice day. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks again, everyone. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.